Welcome back to Outside Views. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for in-depth analysis on Brexit and UK politics. But let's get into today's topic. Donald Trump might not realize it, but he is reshaping the UK's relationship with the European Union in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. And it's ironic. The man who championed Brexit, who encouraged the UK to sever ties with Brussels, and who once was hailed by Brexiteers as the leader of a new nationalist movement, is now pushing Britain and Europe closer together. Not because he wants to, but because he's leaving them with no other choice. But let's talk about what's happening. Ever since Trump was re-elected, his approach to foreign policy has been nothing short of disruptive. He has made it clear that his commitment to NATO is shaky at best. He shifted American priorities away from Europe. And most importantly, he has openly embraced a deal with Russia, signaling a willingness to abandon Ukraine in its fight against Vladimir Putin. For Britain, this is a geopolitical earthquake. Under Boris Johnson and subsequent Conservative governments, the UK positioned itself as one of Ukraine's strongest supporters. British military aid has been critical in Ukraine's defense against Russia. And this was done with the understanding that the United States was fully behind Ukraine. And now that assumption is gone. Trump's shift has left Britain exposed. It has forced the UK government, now led by Keir Starmer, to rethink its entire approach to security and foreign policy. And it is doing something remarkable. It is making closer ties with Europe not just a political option, but a necessity. Starmer was not elected to reopen the Brexit debate. Labour went out of its way to avoid discussions about Europe during the 2024 general election. It didn't want to alienate Leave voters. It didn't want to fight another Brexit battle. But Trump's foreign policy is changing the calculation. Britain now has to prioritize European security like never before, and security cooperation means closer political cooperation. And we are already seeing the effects. The UK has intensified its military partnerships with France and Germany. British defense spending has been increased. And for the first time since Brexit, British leaders are having daily conversations with their European counterparts about joint security strategies. And this is a fundamental shift. And it's not just the Labour government that is adjusting. The Conservative Party, still reeling from its worst electoral defeat in modern history, has been forced into a new position on Europe. Many senior Tories backed Ukraine from the start. They cannot now turn around and abandon that commitment simply because Trump has. And even Nigel Farage, who built his career on opposition to Brussels, has had to tread carefully when it comes to Ukraine. And if you see the PMQs, with him always nodding to Starmer, unbelievable. He knows that outright support for Trump's Russia policy would be political suicide. All of this means that the Brexit conversation is evolving. For years, Brexit was framed as a question of sovereignty, take back control, cut ties with Brussels, be free of EU regulations. And now a new reality is emerging. Brexit has weakened Britain's ability to act on the world stage. And the response to Trump is making that clear. There is an emerging argument that closer cooperation with Europe is not about reversing Brexit. It's about protecting Britain's interests in an unstable world. This is a patriotic argument, and it is working. Even those who once championed Brexit are starting to see the limits of isolation. And the irony here is undeniable. Trump was supposed to be the ultimate ally of Brexit Britain. His presidency in 2016 was celebrated by Brexiteers as proof that a nationalist wave was sweeping the West. Now, in his second term, he is showing just how fragile that vision really was. And Brexit was supposed to make Britain stronger. Instead, it has left Britain scrambling to build new alliances just to keep up. And this goes beyond security. Trump's policies are also affecting the economic conversation in the UK. His aggressive trade stance towards the EU is pushing Britain to rethink its own economic strategy. For years, Brexiteers promised that an independent UK would strike a massive trade deal with the United States. That deal never materialized. And now, with Trump in power again, it's even less likely. And this leaves Britain with a question. If the US is not going to provide the economic boost that Brexit was supposed to deliver, where does Britain turn? And the answer is obvious. Europe remains Britain's biggest trading partner, and the logic of improving trade ties with the EU is becoming harder and harder to ignore. We are not talking about rejoining the EU, despite my return series, which is really hypothetical. That remains politically impossible for now. But we are talking about a new, more pragmatic relationship. One that acknowledges that Britain and the rest of Europe need each other, and that more than ever. One that prioritizes cooperation over confrontation. One that sees Europe not as a rival, but as an ally in an increasingly unpredictable world. And this is not a conversation that would have been possible a few years ago. The scars of Brexit were too fresh, the politics too toxic. But Trump's presidency is accelerating a shift. By forcing Britain to choose between strategic irrelevance and closer European ties, he's doing what no British politician has been able to do since 2016. He is making European cooperation not just a possibility, but a necessity. The reality is that Britain cannot afford isolation. The fantasy of Brexit Britain as a global powerhouse outside the EU is collapsing under the weight of reality. Trump's foreign policy has simply made that collapse more visible. The question now is whether Britain will seize this moment and begin a meaningful shift towards a more cooperative relationship with Europe. Or whether old political fears will keep Britain locked in a position that weakens its influence, its economy, and its security. These are the stakes, and the longer Britain hesitates, the higher the cost will be. But what happens next? Well, will the UK continue to drift closer to Europe? I mean, we've seen the meeting now. Will Starmer push for deeper economic ties as well as security cooperation? And will the Brexit debate finally start to evolve beyond the old arguments of sovereignty and independence? The answers to these questions will define Britain's place in the world for decades to come. But one thing is certain, the conversation has changed. Brexit is no longer a theoretical debate, it's a lived reality. And as that reality unfolds, Britain is finding that it cannot simply go it alone. The world is shifting. The geopolitical landscape is changing. And Britain must decide where it stands. Trump may not realize it. He may not intend it. But his policies are reshaping Britain's relationship with Europe in ways that could have lasting consequences. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below the video. Do you think Britain is now finally moving closer to Europe again? Or the rest of Europe? Is Trump's presidency accelerating this shift? And what do you think the long-term consequences will be for Brexit Britain? Let's discuss. And if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.